Hey there YouTube, Nick with Bonneville Motorworks, and we are back for the third installment of our classic car review series. Now, the last few videos we were able to go through a 74 Cuda, a 62 Corvette. This week we have something incredibly special. With Canon Classic Cars, we are bringing to you a 1968 Pontiac GTO, the GOAT of muscle cars. This one here that we have today is a Judge Tribute, and we'll get into what makes it a tribute versus a true Judge here later in the video. But stick around and enjoy. Really exciting stuff, and this one is going to be really special. So as always, we are going to be reviewing our classic car on 5 different things, and this is going to go on a scale of 1 to 10. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through the design, the aesthetics, really just the look of the car. Second, we're going to go through the history. We're going to go through how important is this car historically when it comes down to comparing to other classic cars. Third, we're going to be looking at the rarity. How hard is this car to find? Fourth, we'll be looking at the powertrain. And fifth, we'll be looking at the comfort. So with an overall score out of 50, let's go ahead and see how this compares to the Cuda and to the Corvette that we started with. First off today, we have the aesthetics. Now, the GTO is an iconic muscle car, one of the all-time greats. And this one here is a 68, is actually the beginning of the Gen 2 in GTOs. There are some really specific stylistic differences that came into play for Gen 2s, for 68 and 69. The first of which, Pontiac moved away from their stacked headlights in the earlier GTO models and went to a side-by-side headlight. So this iconic side-by-side did have an option to be able to hide away the headlights. It was very, very popular. And you also have this central beak that kind of comes out here in the front. Other iconic items that you really look for here on the 68 when you transferred into Gen 2 is a dual hood scoop that sweeps along the hood here on the car, and a hood-mounted tachometer. Now, on the older GTOs, 64 through the 67, you had a single central hood scoop, but this is a much more aggressive design and really shortened up the wheelbase a little bit to the older models to make it much more curvy than the blocky earlier Gen 1 models of the GTO. Because this is a Judge tribute car, there are some key things that we are going to point out that they did very tastefully when they were restoring this car. First of which are some of the decals that you see here running along the side, the pinstriping, the obvious Judge badging that you'll find across the car here on the front, as well as on this spoiler, which was also a Judge factory piece that would come with it. The other thing that I found very interesting was when they had these, they said that these were actually functional spoilers providing downforce, but street legally, you would never actually be able to get to the speeds worth being able to get this downforce with. The final part of the aesthetics here on the exterior that we're going to focus on is just this back bumper area. The low chrome with the taillights in the back end here, absolutely iconic. Very similar to what you might see in an Olds 442 at the same time. And it actually moved away from these in the later models where they went to an above with an 8 light, and worse off when they got to 73 and 74 and the complete design changed. But of all of the GTOs, I think this might be my favorite body style. For the reasons that we've looked at here, the first rating that we're going to give this one out of 5 for the exterior of this, I'm going to have to say it's going to be a 3.4 out of 5. Now we move to the interior. So the next section here, we're looking at the overall layout, comfortability of the inside of this car. Obviously, this one has had a lot of work done to it. It is not going to be original in any respect. It's got aftermarket bucket seats, which hug me quite tightly in here to the cockpit, but it feels really nice. Steering wheel, accessibility to the gauges, being able to see the tack right out the front off of the hood, really nice. headliner and all of the piping work done on the inside of the interior is also very, very classic and ties everything together. Then you also have the badging that just screams its way across on the floor mats, on the door cards here. All in all, the chrome work has been done very tastefully. Does have a T-bar Hurst shifter here attached to a 4-speed, which would have been an option for the GTOs. All in all, I love the wood inlay. I really like the classic feel on the dash and the interior here, and it feels very comfortable. For those reasons, our interior score is going to come in, I think, at about a 4.1 out of 5. So combined, our aesthetic score for this GTO is going to be a 7.5 out of 10. It's a strong start. Next, we're going to get into the history of the GTO. Now, this is one of the most famous muscle cars of all time. Back in 1964, about the same time that every other major pony and muscle car had really started its life, GM, and Pontiac in particular, was wanting something that was a little bit more powerful, a little bit more high-end to be able to tack onto their Le Mans series cars. So the GTO originally in 64 and 65 started out as a high-end package for the Le Mans. Now in 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, and 71, the GTO became its own standalone model. So the very first few were just package changes, a little bit higher horsepower, got a 389 motor in those cars with options for a little bit better transmissions and putting out about 335 horsepower. The ones that came out later, when you started getting into the second generation standalone models for the GTO, they started putting in higher board options for those 389s, actually putting them at a 400 cubic inch displacement, changing out a little bit differently over the course of the years with regards to options for the carburetors that you could get within them and the transmissions, 3 speeds, 4 speeds, manuals, and automatics, and obviously getting into convertibles, not just the hard tops. But the GTO in particular has a really fun history surrounding its name. So the nickname, the GOAT, ultimately was what was picked up by people that were on the streets, even though Pontiac was trying to push the name, the GTO Tiger. GOAT just ended up being what stuck, and for many, this is still the GOAT. But the GTO in general was actually inspired by the Ferrari GTO that we all know and love from movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Well, GTO is the Gran Turismo Omologato, which in Italian basically means this is a grand touring car that is powerful, can race, and it is actually spec'd by the FIA to be able to race in European racing events. Well, there was a GM ban on racing and entering their cars into racing that was put into place in the 1950s. This was one that actually snuck through from Pontiac by getting the GTO badge, emblem, and homologation from the FIA. This car could, in fact, actually race in European and non-American racing events. The GTO in the first generation, as we mentioned before, had the classic stacked headlights, was based on the Le Mans platform, and as it stepped into its own and became its own thing, it really started to ramp up popularity and production. The first year was supposed to only have 500 units produced. Well, it was so popular that it actually ended up selling over 32,000 in the first year of 1964. Now, comparing that to some of the other cars that were competing against something like this back in the 60s, particularly things like the Olds 442, the Mustang, the Plymouth Roadrunner, and the Cuda. All of these cars had a really great line of production. These cars here, the GTOs, really picked up and came into their own in the later 60s. So the 68 actually had a production run of about 87,000 that sold, which was their best year. And that same year, this car won Motor Trend Car of the Year over competitors like the Chevelle Malibu SS and the Plymouth Roadrunner. Absolutely amazing car, and still one of the greatest muscle cars of all time. Because of all these reasons, the history of this car is incredibly important and still is one of the most iconic cars that you can get in the American muscle lineup. For those reasons, this car is going to be coming in today at an 8.1 out of 10. Next on the scale for us that we're going to be looking at is the rarity. Now, I mentioned a little bit here in the history that there was a pretty decent production run of these that came out from 1964 until 1974 at the tail end. But what we're going to focus on is a few things. First off, how many in total were actually made? Well, total production numbers for the GTO in particular, ranging from the high-end Le Mans that was going to be the GTO packages from the 64 and 65, all the way to when they had to go back to a package deal for the Le Mans in 73 and 74. And, in 74, this was actually just a trim package that was on the Pontiac Ventura. After that, the GTO badge went away until the mid-2000s when it was picked back up by Holden in Australia. But classic production numbers for the actual GTO comes in at roughly 515,000 units produced over the course of those 10 years. Now, compared to other companies' production runs like the Mustang, producing well over 1 million, and also we looked into others like the Cuda in our last video that were more in the range of about 300,000. This had a very medium range production run, which came right in line with the likes of the Chevy Chevelle, as well as the Plymouth Roadrunner. The best year for this car was the 1966, which had a production run of over 90,000. 68 had a production run of about 87,000. Depending on where you are looking for these cars, they are somewhat accessible. You can find them on many auction sites like Bring a Trailer. You'll also see them rolling across the block at Mecum all the time. But as far as finding one for yourself, generally speaking, the projects that I was able to find of these selling on Bring a Trailer, somewhere in the range of about $25,000 to $30,000. If you're looking for something that's going to be like this one here, which unfortunately this time is already sold, but in the range of about $45,000 to $60,000 is a pretty standard price range for finding a GTO. And then if you're looking for the really rare, highly optioned Judge versions of this, the actual Judges, one of the more recent ones actually sold on Mecum for $1.1 million. So, as always with high-end muscle cars, you're going to have a very wide range, but if you're wanting to find one for yourself, generally speaking, about the $40,000 to $60,000 range, you should be able to find a pretty good representation of a GTO of your own. For those reasons, and as far as rarity is concerned, I think that this one's going to come in today at a 6.9 out of 10. And next we're coming to the powertrain. So number 4 on our lineup is going to be what actually makes this beast roar. Now, the GTOs, particularly getting here into the 68, did have a 400 cubic inch displacement motor that had been bored up from the 389 of the earlier GTO models. This one does have the 400 in it, and it's obviously had a lot of work done on it. Absolutely incredible engine bay. I am going to be grading this based off the general powertrain, not just on what's done in here. But this is an incredibly good representation of what you would be wanting to get out of your GTO. Now, the 400 CID motor is mated to, generally speaking, a 400 turbo transmission. This one has had a little bit of aftermarket work done, so it's got a Saginaw 4-speed in it. But it does have that classic T-bar Hurst shifter with the 4 on the floor. An incredible representation. Now, the same thing that happened with other muscle cars in the late 70s era, when it transitioned to the Gen 3 GTOs, 73 and 74 had an incredible power reduction. And like I mentioned, they weren't even the standalone GTOs anymore due to the fuel embargo and the energy crisis that took place then. This is probably one of the best representations of American muscle and the power and purity of what that was intended to be there in the late 60s. For these reasons, and with the 4-barrel quad jet that you have sitting on top of the 400, this is going to have to come in at an iconic 7.6 out of 10 for the powertrain. Last on our list of the review for this wonderful GTO is going to be the comfort. Now, as far as I had mentioned earlier, does have aftermarket seats in it, does have a lot of aftermarket work done to it. Steering wheel has some incredible handle grips on the inside of it that make it very comfortable. The Hurst shifter is very easy to grip and grab. Steering wheel is not jamming into my legs, and I have easy accessibility to all of the pedals here, and I can see everything that I need to see. As far as the comfortability of the cockpit is concerned, it's pretty good, comparatively speaking. As far as the drivability and the comfortability of driving this car, I have to say it's pretty amazing. The suspension is relatively tight. I'm not having a bad situation when it comes to oversteer or understeer. It rides really nicely and it holds its own. It also puts the power down to the floor really nicely. So, all things considered, I think that the comfort of this car overall is going to be coming in at a 7.8 out of 10. Thank you for sticking with us, and after breaking down all of the numbers on this amazing 1968 Pontiac GTO, we have a final score of 37.9. Beating out the Cuda, beating out that Corvette. This here is one of the most incredible and iconic muscle cars you could ever hope to own. Thank you so much for sticking with us. If you would like to get any merchandise from our store, you can go to BonnevilleMotorworks.com, and if you want to find yourself a classic like this, go to Cannon Classics Cars in Salt Lake City, Utah. Looking forward to continuing to bring these to you here every few weeks. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.